Still with us, Iris Maklie in Jerusalem. Let's also bring in Ziad Majed here in the French capital, Professor of Middle East Studies at the American University of Paris. Great to have you on the programme, Ziad.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tell me about just zoning out a little bit and just giving a kind of a wider view into this. When we talk about, and Iris talked about Hamas commanders being targeted, often we associate Hamas with Gaza and we talk about Fatah with the West Bank. Just tell us about the proliferation of Hamas within the West Bank as it's seen and how fluid between the two both organisations are.
Well, this is first the same Palestinian society. So if it's true that Hamas controls Gaza, Hamas does also have a presence in the West Bank and in refugee camps in Lebanon or in other places. So it's not a surprise to see that Hamas does have a political and a military presence, even if it does not control the West Bank. The West Bank is, like Gaza, legally speaking, an occupied territory. And I think that there is a kind of an Israeli continuity when it comes to the policy towards the West Bank, regardless of the question of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. Statistically, in 2022, Israel killed 155 Palestinians in the West Bank. In 2023, before October 7, from January to September, Israel killed 194 Palestinian men and women and children in the West Bank. These are according to the UN statistics. And the International Court of Justice issued a month ago an opinion that states clearly that the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza are occupied territories under international law, that this occupation is illegal, is a violation of international law, and that settlements, all of them are illegal and are a violation of international law. It added also that Israel is imposing an apartheid system on the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So the current operation comes within a framework that is historical and that is, of course, taking place today in parallel to the genocidal war in Gaza. That is a campaign by the Israeli government in the West Bank for two reasons. One is, as I said, is a continuity, because in this government there are people like Ben Gvir, like Smotrich, who are themselves settlers and who never hide it. They said it officially on many times and publicly many times that they want to annex the West Bank, and they are forcing for an ethnic cleansing there. They have passed a budget to enlarge and to consolidate the settlers' presence. They are confiscating and stealing land and water from the Palestinians. Their checkpoints continue to humiliate people. Yeah. So this is not something exceptional when it comes to the context. What is exceptional, however, is that Israel is using more military capacities in the West Bank and is creating more damages and more destructions, because I think impunity, in a way, is encouraging the Israelis, and all sanctions that were mentioned previously when it comes to some settler official or responsible or militiaman there are not sufficient. There should be much more by the international community to end with this colonial, settler and criminal violence by the Israeli occupation.
Let's pick up on that. Let's just cross back to Iris a second, talking about settler violence. I must also say, Israeli Foreign Minister, I think Ian Katz, has been clear in his view, accusing Iran as being behind this, saying it is seeking to establish a, quote, Eastern Front against Israel in the West Bank. Senior Palestinian politicians, including Mustafa Barghouti, responding, saying, a bit like we just heard there from Ziad, saying that Iran is being used to avoid the main problem, which goes back 57 years, goes back to 1948. Now, Iris, interesting language this week. I hadn't heard this language before. This was talking about settlers. This was the commander of the West Bank talking about an incident where one person was killed and property destroyed, who described it as an act, quote, of Jewish terrorism. That's not language that's usually used, is it?
It's language that many Israeli politicians are reluctant to use. But this, they were talking about one incident in a town called Jit, a West Bank village called Jit, where about 100 Jewish settlers I'll even call them extremist Jewish settlers, descended on that village. They began firebombing houses and cars. One family, I heard one of the fathers, a man who was in his house, he said he picked up his family and he left as soon as he heard the crowd noise, before the fires had even begun, because that's how nervous he was. And he was right too, since his house was burnt to the ground. So there was, after that incident, very little response from the Israeli military. And what you have heard is actually the result of an inquiry held this week. So that was about 2.5 weeks ago. This is an inquiry that was held, results published this week, relatively quickly, to say that the military did not do its job properly. The security services, the Shin Bet, had warned the military and the police in the West Bank that something was afoot, where it was going to come from, and they simply didn't take enough action. They did keep the two sides apart after a while, but no one was arrested on that night at the scene. Because there was such a strong response within the Israeli government, even from settler groups actually, there have been an arrest of 4 people since then. But you cannot imagine if there was a Palestinian riot with 100 people attacking Israelis in the West Bank, that no one would be arrested. It's just unimaginable.
Iris, thank you so much. Iris Makler, our correspondent in Jerusalem. Briefly, Zayed, as well, there are a lot of France 24 viewers just looking at the situation in the West Bank, and there's a lot that's unclear. And there used to be what we called zones A, B and C in terms of going back to the 90s peace process. I think we had zone A, where you had about 18% Palestinian police administrative control was the idea. B, an area where about 22% joint Israeli-Palestinian controls. Area C, 60% under full Israeli security control, which included the bulk of Palestinian villages. Now, if we look at the situation at the moment, how much is that regarded anymore? Is it seen with a pinch of salt? And ultimately, can the Israeli military carry out operations wherever they want?
Yes, in fact, those zones that you mentioned, A, B, and C, were part of the Oslo agreement, and they were supposed to be a transition before a final agreement could be reached. And then Israel was supposed to evacuate, to withdraw from all occupied territories, except that we have seen in recent years, way before October 7, 2023, that when it comes to the checkpoints, when it comes to the roads that were built by the Israelis and are exclusive for the Israeli army and the settlers, when it comes to the settlements themselves that were enlarged, and we're talking today about more than 750,000 settlers in the occupied West Bank. When it comes to zone B and C, there are no more differences. Israel controls them directly and totally. And when it comes to zone A, they have daily or weekly incursions, no Palestinian sovereignty whatsoever. The Palestinian Authority is isolated in Ramallah. Even when it comes to the money that should be managed by this authority, most of the resources or most of the funds come from Israel that collect taxes and then give part of it to the Palestinian Authority. So the term authority is not valid anymore. And the Oslo framework that was transitional is dead. What is happening today is more and more an Israeli attempt at annexing the West Bank, modifying its demography through the settlements, through pushing Palestinian communities from their land to other places. Yeah. Ben Gvir is even talking about pushing them to Jordan. Yeah. So with 500 Palestinians killed since October 7 in the West Bank, more than 9,000 arrested, the situation is definitely catastrophic and might become even worse if Israeli impunities continues and no sanctions are taken against the Israeli occupation.
Professor Zayed Majid, great to talk to you. Thank you for being on France 24.
Thank you.
Professor at American University of Paris.